My name is Dr. Xylos, senior ethnographer and xenobiologist at the Pan-Galactic Academy of Integrated Sciences. My life's work, like that of my Cathar brethren, has been one of observation, classification, and understanding. We are a people of intellect, our frail bodies and multi-jointed limbs suited for the precise manipulation of data slates and microscopic lenses, not the coarse realities of planetary survival. We pride ourselves on the clarity of our logic, on the unerring accuracy of our taxonomical frameworks. It was this pride, this intellectual certainty, that led to the most profound and terrifying error in the Concordance's history. Our classification of Homo sapiens, before the Hadria IV incident, our understanding of humanity was neat, tidy, and utterly wrong. They were catalogued as Tirsi, generalist bipeds, a species of middling intelligence, unremarkable physiology, and tragically short lifespans. They possessed no natural armor, no specialized sensory organs, no inherent psionic ability, no capacity for atmospheric flight or aquatic respiration. They were, in the grand, colorful tapestry of galactic life, a patch of unassuming beige. Their greatest achievement, the development of warp travel, was considered a fluke of aggressive curiosity, a technological leap that had outpaced their own biological and social development. We saw them as galactic toddlers who had found the keys to a stellar vessel, curious, occasionally loud, but ultimately harmless. They were interesting primarily for their cultural output, a chaotic explosion of art, music, and literature that was as varied as it was ephemeral. We studied them as one might study a particularly complex ant colony, fascinated by their social dynamics, but never once considering them peers, let alone superiors. I held this view with the unshakable conviction of an academic whose theories had been peer-reviewed across 1,000 worlds. As I supervised the annual interspecies field practicum, I observed the human exchange students, Liam and Eva, with a detached, almost paternalistic curiosity. They huddled together on the transport shuttle, sharing auditory input through thin wires connected to a small personal device. It was a classic human behavior, forming small, exclusive social bonds and filtering reality through a layer of self-generated noise. Beside me, Korg, the Vex supervisor, made a low rumbling sound in his chest, a sign of wry amusement. His student, Gralloc, was a prime specimen of their species, a bipedal mountain of chitinous plates and corded muscle, born of a high-gravity world where only the strong survived. Gralloc was meticulously polishing his forearm carapace, a slab of biological armor that could deflect most small arms' fire. "They are fragile, the little humans," Korg rumbled, his multiple eyes blinking in slow succession. "Look at them, no exoskeleton, no redundant organ systems. One solid impact and they rupture like an overripe fruit." "Their strength is not physical, Korg," I countered, my own slender manipulators gesturing towards the data slate on my lap. "The Concordance files note their high degree of social cohesion and rudimentary problem-solving. They are pack animals. Their survivability is tied to the group." "A pack of soft shells is still a pack of soft shells," he grunted. My Gralloc could snap the two of them in half without exertion. I couldn't argue the point. Across the aisle, Lyra, a Cygnian, was preening the delicate, feather-like filaments on her arms. These filaments allowed her species to perceive subtle shifts in air pressure and electromagnetic fields, giving them a form of 360-degree awareness. But her bones were hollow, her body a wisp, built for the low gravity of her homeworld. Each species present was a master of its own evolutionary niche. The Vex were living fortresses. The Cygnians were unparalleled sensors. My own people, the Cathar, were the galaxy's foremost intellects, and the humans, they were average. Their senses were dull compared to Lyra's. Their bodies were pathetic next to Gralloc's. Their minds, while inquisitive, lacked the analytical depth of a Cathar. They were masters of nothing. That was the consensus. That was the fact. Our destination was Hadria IV, a planet classified as a Class 7 crucible world. Not overtly hostile in the sense of weaponized fauna or a sentient, malevolent ecosystem, but simply difficult. Its primary danger was its instability. Tectonically active, with a thin atmosphere that offered little protection from solar radiation during its short, 30-hour day cycle, and temperatures that plummeted to lethal lows during the equally long night. The flora was silicon-based, forming bizarre, metallic jungles that shimmered under the harsh, white light of its star. It was the perfect laboratory for testing survival technology and multi-species cooperation under controlled conditions. Approaching the landing zone, the pilot's synthesized voice announced. "Environmental dome deployment in 5 minutes. All participants, please affix your excursion suits." Gralloc grunted as he sealed his heavy-duty environmental suit, a piece of technology that augmented his already formidable resilience. Lyra's was a lightweight marvel, maintaining a precise bubble of pressure and temperature around her fragile form. Liam and Eva zipped up their standard-issue suits with a practiced ease, their movements efficient but unremarkable. I watched them, my three hearts beating a slow, steady rhythm. The entire exercise was, from my perspective, a formality. A demonstration of the superiority of technology and preparation over the chaos of nature. We landed in a valley floor surrounded by towering spires of what looked like rusted iron trees. The air, even through the ship's filters, had a sharp, ozonic tang. The shuttle's ramp lowered, and the environmental dome flickered to life, projecting a shimmering hemisphere of breathable air and regulated temperature over a 100-meter radius. The first part of the practicum was simple. Cataloging local life forms. Gralloch was tasked with collecting mineral samples, his strength allowing him to break off chunks of the metallic flora. Lyra was to map the area's magnetic fields. The humans were assigned atmospheric and soil analysis. Simple, safe tasks within the protective bubble of the dome. I was conferring with Korg near the shuttle's entrance, reviewing the initial data streams when the world dissolved into violence. It was not a sound at first, but a feeling, a deep, nauseating lurch in the pit of my stomach. The ground beneath us bucked like a living creature. A low, grinding roar echoed from the planet's core, a sound so profound it vibrated in my bones, a seismic event. Far beyond the predicted parameters, I saw the dome generator flicker. Gralloch, for all his strength, was thrown from his feet, his mass working against him. Lyra shrieked, a high-pitched sound of pure terror as the stable pressure in her suit fluctuated wildly. The metallic trees around us swayed, groaning under the strain, and then one of them, a colossal spire of crystalline iron, began to topple. It fell in agonizing slow motion, directly towards the shuttle. The shuttle's pilot, a brave but foolish Zetharn, tried to engage the vertical thrusters. But the ground was still shaking, throwing off the gyroscopic stabilizers. The falling spire struck the ship not with a clean impact, but a grinding, tearing blow that peeled the hull open like a discarded ration pack. The shriek of tortured metal was the last thing I heard before the dome generator exploded in a shower of sparks, and the raw, untamed atmosphere of Hadria IV washed over us. The air was thin, searing my respiratory membranes. The pressure change was a physical blow. The safety of our technology, the entire premise of the controlled exercise, had vanished in less than 10 seconds. We were stranded. My multi-tool reported the shuttle's primary systems were offline. The long-range comms array was a mangled wreck. The pilot was gone. Korg was pinned by a piece of debris, roaring in pain. Panic, a sensation I had only ever studied, bloomed in my chest. Lyra was hyperventilating, her delicate physiology unable to cope. Gralloch, free of the debris, was trying to re-establish a command structure, but his booming orders were lost in the chaotic aftermath. And the humans, Liam and Eva, were already moving. There was no hesitation. No screaming. While Lyra was lost in terror and Gralloch was bellowing ineffectual commands, the two humans were a blur of focused activity. Eva was already at Korg's side, her medkit open. She ignored his roars, her voice calm and steady. "Hold still. The pressure is crushing your lower limb. I need to see the damage." Liam was assessing the shuttle. His movements were quick, economical. He wasn't looking at the catastrophic damage. He was looking for what was salvageable. His eyes scanned the wreckage with an intensity I had never seen in him. It was not the look of a student. It was the look of a scavenger who knew that survival depended on what could be stripped from a carcass. "The dome is gone," Lyra wailed, her filaments trembling. "The radiation, the cold is coming." The sun was already dipping towards the horizon, painting the iron sky in hues of blood and rust. The temperature was dropping. I could feel it through my own damaged suit, a creeping chill that promised a slow, agonizing death. "Everybody, listen to me." Liam's voice cut through the rising panic. It wasn't loud like Gralloch's, but it had a quality of command that was startling. All eyes turned to him. "The ship's main power is shot, but the emergency life support batteries should be intact. Eva, how's Korg? His leg is broken." "Badly, compound fracture," she replied without looking up, her hands working deftly to apply a stabilizing splint made from a piece of the shuttle's interior paneling. "He can't move. Gralloch, I need you, your strength. We have to get this girder off him." Gralloch, who moments before had been trying to assert dominance, now looked at this small, soft human and simply nodded. He seemed to recognize a different kind of authority, one not born of physical prowess but of sheer, unadulterated competence. Together, they managed to lift the beam just enough for Eva to pull Korg free. The Vex supervisor was groaning, his pride wounded as much as his leg. My role, I realized with a sickening jolt, had been rendered obsolete. I was the senior academic, the mission leader. But my knowledge of xenolinguistics and cultural theory was useless here. I could classify 1,000 species, but I couldn't set a broken bone or salvage a power cell. As night began to fall in earnest, the temperature plummeted. A new, more immediate threat emerged. Gralloch, the formidable Vex warrior from a world of scorching heat, began to shiver violently. His species' dense, chitinous bodies were excellent at retaining heat, but terrible at generating it quickly or adapting to sudden cold. He was a biological furnace with no thermostat. His core temperature is dropping, Eva said, pressing a diagnostic tool against his carapace. His mass is working against him. He'll go into metabolic shock if we don't get him warm. It was Liam who solved it. He had scavenged several thermal blankets from the wreck, but they weren't enough. I watched baffled as he began instructing Gralloch and the still-shaking Lyra to huddle together. Then he and Eva positioned themselves on either side of the massive Vex, pressing their bodies against his. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice thin in the cold air. "Sharing body heat," Liam said, his teeth chattering slightly. "We run hot, our metabolism is inefficient, burns a lot of energy just to stay alive. Right now, that's a good thing." I accessed my internal databanks, my mind racing. Homo sapiens, endothermic, high-resting metabolic rate. A trait we had always considered a biological liability, requiring massive caloric intake and producing excess heat. A messy, wasteful system. But here, in the freezing dark of a hostile world, that waste was being used as a survival tool, a biological generator to warm a creature a dozen times more physically powerful. They built a makeshift shelter from slabs of the shuttle's hull, angled to block the wind. It was crude, ugly, and remarkably effective. Within an hour, they had established a pocket of relative stability in a world of chaos. They were not using advanced technology. They were using garbage, blankets, and their own bodies. As the night wore on, a new sound reached us, a high-pitched chittering that seemed to echo off the metallic trees. Lyra's filaments stood on end. "Something's out there," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Many somethings." Gralloch forced himself to his feet, grabbing a jagged piece of metal as a club. "Let them come, I will show them Vex fury." "Down," Liam ordered, his voice a low hiss. He peered into the oppressive darkness. "We don't know what they are. We don't fight what we don't understand." This simple statement struck me with the force of a physical blow. It was the absolute antithesis of the Vex mindset, but it was the very core of Cathar philosophy. Yet here it was, coming from the mouth of a primitive human. The chittering grew closer. From the shadows between the iron trees, figures emerged. They were quadrupedal, about the size of a large canine, with sleek, insectoid bodies and powerful mandibles that clicked and snapped. Skittermaws the database on my multi-tool supplied, though the data was sparse. Ambush predators, fast, one of them charged. It was a blur of motion, far faster than Gralloch could react. It dodged his clumsy swing and lunged, its mandibles aiming for his unarmored joints. He bellowed as it tore a chunk from his thigh. Before it could strike again, Liam was there, ramming the sharpened end of a metal strut into the creature's side. It shrieked and retreated, vanishing back into the darkness with its kin. Gralloch slumped to the ground, his leg bleeding profusely. Eva was on him instantly, her face a mask of concentration as she worked to staunch the flow of dark, viscous Vex blood. "They'll be back," Liam said, his breathing heavy. "They've scented blood, they know one of us is wounded. We are trapped," Lyra sobbed. "They will surround us and wait for us to die." "No," Liam said. His eyes had a strange light in them, a look of primal calculation that chilled me to my core. "They're ambush predators, fast sprinters. They hit, they run, they wait for the prey to weaken." He looked at Eva. "But they're not built for a chase." Eva looked up from her work on Gralloch's leg, her face smeared with alien blood. She nodded slowly, a silent, terrifying understanding passing between the two humans. "Their respiration rate is explosive. They'll have a high oxygen debt. They can't sustain a long pursuit." "What are you talking about?" Korg asked from his position on the ground, his voice strained with pain and confusion. Liam looked at the darkness where the creatures had vanished. "We're not going to wait for them to come to us," he said, his voice flat. "We're going to hunt them." A profound silence fell over our small, pathetic group. The statement was so audacious, so utterly insane, that for a moment I was certain I had mistranslated. Korg stared at him, his multiple eyes wide with disbelief. Lyra made a small, choking sound. "Hunt them," Gralloch growled, trying to rise. "They are too fast. A Vex warrior could not land a blow." "You tried to fight it head-on, Gralloch," Eva said, her voice still calm, but with an undertone of cold steel. "You played its game, we're going to play ours." She stood up, having finished patching the Vex's wound. She began to stretch her legs, her movements fluid and practiced. It was a ritual I seen her perform before their physical education sessions at the academy, one I'd dismissed as trivial. Now it looked like a predator preparing for the kill. On our homeworld, Liam explained, his eyes never leaving the darkness, our ancestors weren't the strongest or the fastest. There were creatures that could outrun us in a sprint, and creatures that could tear us apart with one blow. "So how did you survive?" I whispered, the question torn from my own throat. Liam picked up the metal spear he had fashioned. He tested its weight, its balance. "We didn't outrun them, we outlasted them. We ran them to death." He was talking about persistence hunting, a predatory tactic so ancient, so primal, it was virtually unheard of among intelligent spacefaring species. Most predators were specialists, ambushers, trappers, sheer brutes. The concept of a predator that simply wore its prey down through sheer, relentless stamina was a biological horror story. It implied a level of endurance and mental fortitude that was, frankly, terrifying. "You are soft-shelled prey," Korg rasped, incredulous. Eva let out a short, sharp laugh, a sound devoid of humor. "We stopped being prey a long time ago, Korg. We just got so good at it that we forgot what we were." With that, the two humans moved out from the relative safety of our shelter into the freezing dark of Hadria IV. They did not move with the explosive speed of the skittermaws, but with a steady, ground-eating lope. It was an awkward, ungainly gait, the bipedal motion we had always deemed inefficient, but it was rhythmic, relentless. They were not sprinting. They were settling in for the long haul. "They are insane," Lyra breathed, her body trembling uncontrollably. "They will die." But I was beginning to understand. I was watching a living fossil, a ghost of Earth's Pliocene, reenacting the strategy that had propelled their species to planetary dominance. I activated the microscopic sensors in my ocular lenses, zooming in on Eva's form as she ran. Her body was a masterpiece of thermal regulation. A fine sheen of moisture was forming on her skin, sweat. A remarkably efficient evaporative cooling system. Most species in the galaxy avoided water loss at all costs, evolving sealed skin or heat-radiating plates. Humans wastefully, gloriously, pumped water out of their bodies to maintain a stable core temperature during extreme exertion. It was a system designed for one purpose: to keep going when every other creature had to stop. Their breathing was deep and regular, their large lung capacity drawing in the thin air. Their feet, with their arched structure and spring-like tendons, were absorbing the impact of the hard ground and returning it as energy. Their gluteal muscles, ridiculously oversized for a simple biped, were stabilizing their torsos, allowing them to run for hours without toppling. Every average feature of their biology was, in fact, part of a single, terrifyingly effective system of endurance. We waited. The minutes stretched into an hour. The only sounds were the wind and Lyra's quiet sobbing. Gralloch sat in stunned silence, staring at the wound in his leg, then out into the darkness. He, the pinnacle of Vex evolution, had been crippled in seconds, and now two of the frailest creatures he had ever met were out hunting the thing that had crippled him. The foundations of his worldview were cracking. Then we heard it. The chittering of the skittermaws, but this time it was different. It was panicked, distant, then closer, then farther again. It was the sound of a creature being harried, driven. Through my enhanced vision, I caught glimpses of the chase. The skittermaws were faster, yes. They would bound ahead, then stop, expecting the pursuit to end. But it never did. Liam and Eva were not trying to catch them. They were just there, always present, always closing the distance at that same steady pace. I saw one of the creatures stumble, its movements becoming sluggish. Its explosive metabolism, so effective for a short ambush, was now its undoing. It was overheating, its muscles filling with metabolic waste. It was being run into the ground. The final act of the hunt happened just within the edge of our view. One of the skittermaws, its energy spent, finally collapsed. It lay on the ground, twitching, its sides heaving as it tried to draw breath. Liam and Eva approached it cautiously. There was no triumphant roar, no display of dominance. Just a quiet, grim efficiency. Liam dispatched the creature with a single, precise thrust of his spear to a vulnerable joint in its neck. They stood over the body for a moment, their breath pluming in the frigid air. Then, without a word, they began to work. Eva produced a knife from her kit and began to expertly butcher the creature. It was a process of shocking pragmatism. They weren't just killing a threat, they were harvesting resources. The hide, she explained later, could be used for insulation and bindings. The meat, once cooked, would provide the calories they so desperately needed to fuel their high-energy bodies. They returned to the shelter, dragging the carcass with them. They were coated in sweat and alien blood, their faces etched with fatigue, but their eyes held a terrifying clarity. They looked ancient, primeval. They were no longer the goofy, music-loving students from the transport. They were apex predators who had just secured their territory and their next meal. Lyra scrambled away from them, pressing herself against the far wall of the shelter. Korg and Gralloch simply stared, a mixture of awe and horror on their faces. You killed it," Gralloch stammered. "It was us or them," Liam said simply. He was already using a shard of metal to scrape flammable marrow from the creature's bones. He used the last charge from a salvaged battery to create a spark, and soon, a small, controlled fire was crackling, casting flickering shadows against the walls of our makeshift cave. The smell of cooking meat filled the air. I looked at the two humans, huddled by the fire they had created, eating the flesh of the monster they had run to death, and I felt a cold dread that had nothing to do with the planet's temperature. We had not misclassified Homo sapiens. We had failed to comprehend the very nature of their existence. We saw a generalist and thought it meant mediocre. We were wrong. Generalist meant adaptable. It meant they were not bound to a single niche. It meant that any niche could become theirs if they were pushed hard enough. We had catalogued thousands of apex predators across the galaxy. The stealthy hunters of Mylar, the brutish behemoths of Vex, the psionic stalkers of the Signian Vale. All of them were defined by their strengths, but humans were defined by their lack of weaknesses. Any environment that did not kill them instantly they could learn to master. They could withstand heat and cold. They could function with grievous injuries. They could turn garbage into tools and enemies into food, and they could run. My gods, they could run. The philosophical implications were staggering. The concordance was built on the idea of specialized cooperation. Each species brought its unique gift to the table. The Vex brought strength, the Signians brought awareness, the Cathar brought intellect. What was humanity's gift? It was the ability to render every other gift obsolete through sheer, bloody-minded persistence. As the night wore on, a new danger arrived. A light, fizzing rain began to fall. My multi-tool analyzed it instantly. Low-level carbonic acid, a result of atmospheric moisture mixing with volcanic outgassing. It wouldn't dissolve us instantly, but prolonged exposure would damage our suits and burn our skin. Our metal shelter, which had protected us from the wind, now became a death trap, channeling the corrosive rain onto us. Lyra shrieked as a drop touched her exposed filament, causing it to curl and smoke. Once again, it was the humans who reacted. While the rest of us panicked, they were already problem-solving. Eva used strips of the skittermaw's hide, which was apparently acid-resistant, to create crude coverings for our heads and shoulders. Liam, meanwhile, was looking up. "The ridge," he said, pointing towards a high escarpment a few kilometers away. "It's above the worst of the atmospheric haze. If we can get the shuttle's emergency beacon up there, the signal might cut through the interference." The journey seemed impossible. We had 2 injured members, one of whom was a Vex warrior weighing nearly 300 kilos. The terrain was treacherous and the acid rain was getting heavier. "Never make it," Korg stated, his usual pragmatism now colored with despair. "Yes, we will," Eva said. She was looking at Gralloch. "You're strong. You can carry your father." "We'll help you," she then turned to Liam. "I'll carry Lyra. She's light." The idea was absurd. Gralloch was injured. Eva was exhausted from the hunt, yet there was no debate. They began preparing. They wrapped Korg's broken leg, fashioned a harness for Gralloch to carry him, and bundled the terrified Lyra into a thermal blanket that Eva could sling over her shoulder. The trek to the ridge was a waking nightmare, a slow, agonizing crawl through hell. The acid rain hissed against our makeshift coverings. The ground was slick and unstable. I, with my frail Cathar body, stumbled constantly. Each time, before I could hit the ground, Liam's hand would be there, steadying me. His grip was surprisingly strong. Gralloch, driven by a strange mix of Vex pride and a newfound respect for the humans, bore his father's weight with guttural groans. His own wound bled sluggishly, but he did not stop. He was watching the humans, as if trying to understand the source of their impossible resilience. Eva was the true marvel. She carried the dead weight of Lyra, yet her pace was as steady as it had been during the hunt. Her breathing was controlled, her movements economical. She was operating at a level of physical and mental endurance that should have been impossible. At one point, I saw her stumble, her face pale with exhaustion. She paused for a fraction of a second, took a deep breath, and then squared her shoulders and kept going. It was not strength of muscle, but strength of will. A refusal to surrender that was more powerful than any exoskeleton. During a brief rest under an overhanging ledge, I found myself next to Liam. He was checking the salvaged beacon, his fingers deftly manipulating the delicate circuitry despite the cold and the pain. "Your species," I began, my voice raspy. "We have misjudged you. This capacity, this will to survive, it is not in any of our records." Liam didn't look up from his work. "It wouldn't be," he said, his voice flat with fatigue. You studied us in our cages, I asked, confused. We observed you in your native environment, on Earth. He finally looked at me and his eyes were old, centuries old. Earth isn't our native environment anymore, civilization is. We live in climate-controlled boxes, we eat food someone else killed, we travel in machines. We've been living in a zoo of our own making for thousands of years. You didn't study the animal. You studied the exhibit. He gestured to the howling wind and the acid rain. This is the cage we were actually built for. The revelation was profound. We had studied a domesticated species and mistaken it for the wild animal. The true Homo sapiens had been dormant, sleeping under layers of comfort and technology. Hadria IV had not introduced a new threat, it had simply woken an old one. We reached the ridge just as the first hints of dawn touched the horizon. The air was clearer here. Liam and Eva, working in tandem with an almost telepathic understanding, jury-rigged the beacon to a power cell and a salvaged signal amplifier. Their fingers, raw and blistered, moved with precision. It was another facet of their horrifying adaptability, the fine motor skills of a crafter combined with the constitution of a brute. Liam aligned the dish. "This is it," he said and flipped a switch. A faint, pulsing whine filled the air. A single green light on the device blinked to life. It was working, all we could do then was wait. We huddled together on that windswept ridge, a bizarre tableau of galactic life forms, all of us saved by the two members of the species we had dismissed as average. Gralloch sat beside Eva, watching as she cleaned her tools, his expression one of deep, transformative contemplation. Lyra had finally stopped shaking, her gaze fixed on Liam as if he were some terrifying, benevolent deity. Hours later, a silver speck appeared in the sky. It grew larger, resolving into an Academy rescue vessel. As it landed, its ramp lowering to reveal a team of heavily armed medics and security officers, they saw us. They saw the injured Vex being supported by his son. They saw the terrified Signian being comforted by me. And they saw the two human students, standing slightly apart, leaning on their improvised spears, their faces streaked with dirt and dried blood, watching the ship with the wary, calculating eyes of survivors. Of predators, the official report was a masterpiece of academic obfuscation. It spoke of unforeseen seismic events, equipment failure, and the commendable cooperation of the survivors. It praised the bravery of all involved. But it was a lie, a comforting fiction to preserve the established order. I wrote my own report, an addendum, a warning. I sent it directly to the highest echelons of the concordance. I am writing this now from my quiet study at the Academy months later. The Hadria IV incident has been filed away. Liam and Eva have been commended for their bravery and have returned to their studies. To everyone else, they are the same unremarkable students they were before. They laugh with their friends, complain about their coursework, listen to their strange, rhythmic music, but I see them differently now. When I look at Liam, I don't see a student. I see a creature who can fashion a weapon from scrap and lead a desperate charge. When I see Eva, I don't see a young woman. I see a persistence hunter who can run her prey to exhaustion and then calmly butcher it for sustenance. I have erased the classification of Tier C, generalist from my private database. In its place, I have created a new provisional designation for Homo sapiens, a classification I dare not share publicly, threat level, apex, designation. Persistence predator, primary attributes, unparalleled environmental adaptability, extreme endurance far exceeding galactic norms, high-level problem-solving in crisis scenarios, efficient pack dynamics under duress. A psychological resilience that allows for continued function despite extreme pain, fatigue, and emotional trauma. Their perceived biological mediocrity is, in fact, their greatest weapon, a suite of generalized traits that allows them to thrive in any environment where they are not immediately annihilated. The concordance believes power lies in specialization. A species is strong or fast or intelligent. Humanity is all three, not to a superlative degree in any one category, but to a terrifyingly effective level in all of them simultaneously. We are a galaxy of specialists. We are scalpels, hammers, and keys, each perfectly suited for its task. Humans are not a tool. They are a hand, capable of gripping any tool or balling itself into a fist, the great filter of the galaxy. The reason so few intelligent species survive to become spacefaring has always been their home planets. They must be strong enough to overcome their world's challenges, but not so strong that they exhaust its resources and destroy themselves. Humans did both. They conquered their world, and then in their domestication, they nearly destroyed it. And this has instilled in them a unique, paradoxical nature. The ingenuity of a creator and the ruthlessness of a survivor. Our greatest mistake was believing they were like us. We judged them by their technology, by the comfort of their worlds. We never thought to ask what they were like when the lights went out and the walls came down. We never understood that their civilization wasn't a sign of their advancement. It was a cage they had built to protect the rest of the universe from themselves. The Hadria IV incident is over, but my fear has just begun. Because one day, the rest of the galaxy will create a crisis that humanity cannot solve with diplomacy or trade. And on that day, when they are pushed, when their survival is on the line, the cage door will open. The zookeepers will be gone, and the true nature of Homo sapiens will be revealed to a galaxy that is utterly, fatally unprepared for it. We thought we were observing a new, unremarkable species. We were wrong. We were the ones being observed, catalogued by a predator that had not yet decided if we were a threat, a resource, or simply in its way.